a second pair of hands. So I am facilitating on my own, and we have a lot of people in the room today, so please bear with me. I'd also like to acknowledge our funders, the National Landcare Network and the State NRM Office, so thank you so much. We're going to take a slightly less formal structure for the Landcare Checks In today. I was just talking to our presenters offline about how I really wanted this Landcare Checks In, despite my OCD and inherent desire for structure, to be more of a chat, a drop-in and a bit of a yarn and a chat space that we can learn about what's happening in your patch. I don't want to talk at you, I want to hear from you. So we're going to have some nice brief and relaxed presentations, and then we're really going to open up the floor for discussion, because this is really what Landcare Checks In was designed for. So we want to try and get back to our roots there. I'd like to start off with Bruce, if that's okay, Bruce. And Bruce is going to be chatting to us about some seedling trials that he's been running in some different parts of the southwest.
Thanks, Casey. I'm trying to share my screen at the moment. Okay, can you see that?
We can.
Casey, you there?
Yeah, we can see it there, Bruce.
What do I need?
It's not on full screen there.
And remind me how I do that, please.
Alva, could you chime in?
Yeah, so Bruce, if you looking at your screen, you probably have in your PowerPoint view. If you look at there's probably a little either an icon or a tab up on the right hand side that says display full screen. I can just actually open my PowerPoint and see if I can tell you exactly where that might be. But look for, it normally looks like a monitor, like a little monitor icon. Just try clicking on anything that looks like that while I open PowerPoint and see if we can.
Okay.
Or share or full screen or an arrow with little hatches in the side of a screen.
Yeah, I can't see anything at the moment.
We can work with that, Bruce. The view that it's fine.
Yeah, okay. So thank you for the opportunity to spend a few minutes telling you about what I've been doing. I run a little business called Trees Australia, and I take school kids tree planting. So a lot of what I'm going to tell you about is actually focused through the lens of what I have to do to get school kids to work, particularly in the coastal areas in this case. And you can see a bunch of kids walking up the hill there, down at Mile And I've clicked the next screen. And for those of you who are not all that familiar with Mile this is a map of showing the north end of the township. And on the left-hand side is the Indian Ocean. And you can see the beach that runs along the edge of the ocean there. And there's about 900 metres of beach there. And that's the area we were planting. It's land that belongs to the Shire of Harvey. And we've been trying to plant all of the bare areas that you can see there. And for those of you who aren't in WA, that's where Mile is, down in that bottom left-hand corner. So this is what tree planting for the kids typically looks like out on the dunes. And we did this for a while, and I thought, we really need to be able to do better than this. I want to inspire these kids a bit to be able to do work. And I'll get to the inspiring bit in a moment. This is the background. So there's the ute with all the gear. We've got the seedling buckets near the ute, and we've got all the seedlings close to us. And so if I go on, there's a tray of the ute full of tree planters, which we use for the kids to plant. And so what are our priorities? Wind erosion control and inspiring the students. So we've taken on some sites that look like this one, which are pretty windblown, because I figured they're some of the toughest sites. So if we can get things to work in a site like this, then we can probably get them to work in other places too. And the challenge in this site was I buy spinifex from 2 different nurseries, and you can see a sample of them there. This is back in 2021. So the ones on the left are in forestry tubes, the ones on the right in cell trays, and the ones on the right are obviously better grown. So which is going to survive the best in that very harsh environment? And that's just a little note to say, the different types of seedlings. See, the ones on the left were considerably more expensive than the ones on the right. So this is the site we chose, and here's the kids planting. The C stand on the little peg stands for cell tray, the T for forestry tube. So we got the kids to plant out a trial and mark each seedling as they did it. You can see them working away there. And we got excited about that. And so the next year we did the same thing, but we made it a bit bigger. And this is 2022 with the kids planting along those rows, different species. And they were also using fertiliser tablets. We'll get to them in a moment. And that's what their trial looked like when they'd finished. So there's a combination of different treatments there. You can see large cardboard tree guards and small cardboard tree guards running across the trial, and then individual plant species running sort of from the left to the right up the hill. And as I said, we used fertiliser tablets this time around. So there's the fertiliser tablets. They're just Arbortab general purpose 10-gram ones, a compound fertiliser in them. And we wondered if they would make any difference to the way in which the seedlings grew. And this is what we found about 75 weeks after planting. So you can see going from the top left, you can see a row of seedlings that got a fertiliser tablet a year after planting, and they're Ficcinia nodosa. The next row across is Spinifex longifolius with no fertiliser, and you can tell because you can hardly see them. And then the third row, the biggest, healthiest looking seedlings, are Ficcinia nodosa with a fertiliser tablet at planting. The next row across is Spinifex with fertiliser at planting, much healthier than without, but not particularly big plants. And then finally on the right, Ficcinia with no fertiliser. Now, you notice in the top right-hand corner of the screen, there's a lot of fairly sad-looking cardboard tree guards. And we'd had this experience on a number of times before, that it's fine to put tree guards in there, but how long do they last? So what we learnt from this experience was that perhaps we could grow our own guards in the form of planting Ficcinia nodosa and giving it a fertiliser tablet, and then being able to plant some of the tender species that won't grow in that very harsh bare sand environment in behind the Ficcinia. So that's where we're at in our thinking with this at the moment. And those plants have continued to grow and look very healthy, those Ficcinia with the fertiliser at planting. So this was last year. We decided to do the same thing to see if we could repeat the success we'd had with using fertiliser on the Ficcinia. And the kids are busily planting there. And here are the results. What we found was that Ficcinia with no fertiliser, we had a 99% survival rate, but they only reached 11.9 centimetres higher. When we added fertiliser, the survival rate dropped to 74%, but we had a 19.1% height. 19.1 centimetre height. So we lost some seedlings, but they grew nearly twice as much. And the same thing with the Spinifex, 80 down to 68% without and with fertiliser, but 8.8 and up to 18 centimetres by adding the fertiliser. So this is my last slide. So I just want to underline that there's no fixed answers here. We have an interesting and complex biological situation that we're dealing with. So after the previous year, when we thought we'd got it all sorted out, that fertiliser was going to fix everything, it hasn't. And I would suggest that the reason is probably due to the lack of rain in 2023, but I don't really know that yet. So thank you for the opportunity to present. I hope that gives you some things to think about, and I welcome some questions at another date. So thanks, Case, back to you.
Thank you, Bruce. If anyone has any specific questions for Bruce, he does have to unfortunately leave us a bit earlier. We do appreciate you just dropping in for those few minutes, Bruce.
Yeah,
amazing work that you're doing, and I'm looking forward to seeing the next couple of years of trials as well.
Yeah, look, I've got a minute for one or two questions now.
Okay, Sue Conlon has got her hand raised in the chat.
Thanks, Bruce. I'm just wondering if you could tell us how often you watered and what months.
In this case, there was no watering at all.
Wow.
Except that we had quite a lot more rain in 2022 than we did in 2023. James.
James, do you want to jump in there? Just on mute.
Yep, I love your systematic approach. What did you use as fertiliser, Bruce?
The Arbitab fertiliser tablets.
Okay,
a little picture of it earlier on.
Yeah.
And the way we handled them was, because we're planting with kids and we've got to do everything very fast and at scale, we put the fertiliser tablets and the seedlings in the same bucket, made sure the kids were wearing gloves, and they dropped the fertiliser tablet down the tube first and planted the seedling on top of it.
Cool, thank you.
When you're doing stuff with kids, it's got to be simple and it's got to be able to be quick, because I have a large workforce for a very short period of time on site. So I've got to think up really simple processes they can handle.
That's great, Bruce. Does the fertiliser that you're using contain urea at all?
It's got nitrogen in it, but whether it's urea or not, I'm not sure. Looks like Sue has another question.
Bruce, when you planted on the 2nd of June, did you water in?
No, all of these were just plant. That was the 2nd of June was 2023, and the site was damp. Actually, as I recall, we'd had 300 millimetres before planting at that site. I've got a friend there who keeps a rain gauge, and we had 330 millimetres for the rest of the year.
I wonder, Bruce, is there any relationship? I saw that you had those rows and they were planted, you know, obviously staggered down a slope. I wonder, is there any relationship between the mortality rate and the positioning on the slope? So whether or not, if you had those variations of fertilizer, no fertilizer, and the different species all in a line, whether we'd have seen different results. And I have no idea what the answer to that question is. So if you do, I'd be intrigued.
I hadn't thought about it before. Off the top of my head, I think that the other thing that we have found is on those very bare open areas, there doesn't seem to be a lot of water repellents. Where you get into part of the beach where the sand is not recently blown, where there's a bit of vegetation already there, the soil seems to be a lot more water repellent than it does in the open areas. So I haven't really taken water repellents into account before, and that's something I'm going to try and work into this year's trial. It's really going to be very similar to last year, with and without fertiliser, but I think we'll probably split the plot in half and just put on granulated soil wetter and see if we get any better growth or survival rate using that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Please don't feel that you need to stay, Bruce.
Okay. Well,
if anyone has any questions, I'll make sure they get fielded to you at a later date. And would it be okay to share your presentation later on as well?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, please. You're very welcome to share it.
Great. Thanks, Bruce.
I welcome anybody's thoughts in the future.
Okay,
thanks
so much. Thank you.
Legend. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, now I'm in the hot seat because I'm sharing Mike's presentation. So let's see how we go here. Are you all ready to go, Mike?
I'm ready to go, yep.
Okay, so we're going to hear from Mike Ewing from Cottesloe Coastcare, very high performing coast care group in the Perth region. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you, Mike. Just share my screen. Can everyone see that okay?
Yep.
Great.
Good, okay, thanks. Well, I'm involved with Cottesloe Coastcare, and we're a smallish group that's been running pretty much continuously for 30 years now. And over that period, on average, we planted about 5,000 shrubs per year into our coastal dune system. And so over the course of those 30 years, there's been a lot of trial and error and a lot of honing of our techniques to try and get as high a proportion of survival and good growth. And to a large extent, I think we've come up with a system that works for us. We have some characteristics that are relatively unique. One of the worst aspects for us is the fact that the area has been so long developed and had a chance for weeds to spread absolutely everywhere. So we have major issues with weed management, and that has to be a major part of our pre-planning. But today I'm just going to be mainly talking about how we go about the planting. So the take on board the fact that before we actually get to planting, we've done a fair bit of work on weed control. So maybe the next slide. So what I was asked to talk about today was issues around nutrition. Well, I thought I'd talk about the system that we use and point out where the nutritional part comes in. So, you know, we regard our approach as a system. It has a number of components, and if you don't do any of the components right, well, you start to see reductions in the final survival rate. So we plant with tube stock, usually acquired from the Apace nursery in North Fremantle, and we typically plant at a density of about 1 plant per square metre. And we've developed a system of planting at the bottom of a basin-shaped hole. There's a diagram there of kind of schematic of how it looks, but it's about a 60 centimetre across hole that goes down 25 or 30 centimetres, and it's got a loosened bit in the bottom where we actually plant into. And early on in our life, we made those holes by digging with shovels, but in more recent times, we've developed a way of doing that mechanically. I'll come to that separately, but you can sort of see the holes that we produce in the image on the screen. And so the holes, into the holes before planting, we add fertiliser, and I'll come to the fertiliser part in a minute, and we water, usually with about 5 litres of water containing wetting agent. And we usually try and plant relatively early in late May and early June, and often the site isn't sufficiently wet up with rain prior to planting, and so that pre-planting watering is really helpful in providing a good environment for the seedling to go into. If we had a lot of rain, that may not be necessary, but certainly in years like this, when it's totally dry, the watering is essential pre-planting. So can we go back? So they go in at the bottom of that hole. The fertiliser, we've tried quite a lot of things in the past, slow release native fertiliser tablets, and terracotta, which contains the soil crystals as well as some nutrition. But what we've found with trial and error and some soil testing, which gave us very clear indications that the major nutrient deficiency in our system was nitrogen. And so we've iterated towards a system where we place 10 grams of fertiliser into that hole, and it's made up of a 50-50 mix of a broad spectrum slow release krill and 50% urea, and we just put a pre-measured 10-gram lot into the bottom of the hole and water it in. We sometimes, if we have mulch available, we would put a bit of mulch around the plant just to reduce water loss. And then later on in the year, we often weed annual weeds out of the holes, and then between November and April, depending on summer rain, we water about monthly. It's often 3 or 4 waterings, but you know, that's it depends on the resources we have, but that's what we aspire to. Okay, can we have the next one? So I was talking about the holes. This is the way we make our holes now. We've developed a specialised auger head to go on a still petrol-driven auger that makes a hole in sandy sites. You can see that's me operating the auger, we've spent quite a lot of time designing the auger head. We have an engineer in our group who's spent a lot of time and effort thinking about how it should be, and we've done since. This was about 4 years ago, we started using the auger, and we've refined the system now to the point where it's working very well. A person like me can auger about 200 holes an hour, and a fit young person can keep that up all day. I certainly flag after an hour, but that's so it's possible to make, you know, a fit person can do 1,000 holes a day quite comfortably, and that's so that's our auger. Next slide just shows close up, I think, what the hole would look like. You can see the hole next to it's had the water put into it. You can see the fertilizer in the bottom of that hole, and that's that 10-gram mix of urea and slow release fertilizer. Next slide, please. So this is the material that goes together to make up our fertilizer mix. We just buy bulk urea and bulk Osmocote and mix it up, and you can see there that teaspoonful is 10 grams. So it's a pretty easy operation to put it into the holes prior to planting. But what we found is that it greatly enhances the first year growth of all species, but particularly things like perennial grasses like the spinifex are very, very responsive to the nitrogen in the fertilizer. And so I think that shows a few typical plants on the next slide. Okay, so this is a site which we planted 4 years ago now, but this is the growth of the plants almost exactly 1 year after planting. So you can see we've got incredibly good growth. It was a year where we had good summer rain, so this is as good as it gets, but that's the sort of growth we can get in. That was in June, the year after planting the previous June, and the spinifex on the left are plants in that planting. And if we see symptoms of yellowing of the grasses during the summer or autumn, we have found it's possible to go and add extra nitrogen, another 10 grams, and get even additional better response. So if you go to the next slide, it's just a bit of a reality check. This is a plant that was planted 12 months ago. This was and I took the photo last week. So that's 12 months growth in our very bad year this year in terms of water. So that's just a very quick run through of what we do. There's a lot in there in the fine detail. So I'm happy to respond to questions, but I didn't want to talk too long.
That was fantastic, Mike. What amazing success you're having there. Can I just ask what your resourcing's like? What's your volunteer network like up there?
So we have about 100 members, of whom 20 to 30 are reasonably regular participants, and we do monthly working bees in the weekend, and we typically get 20 people to those. What we have done in the last few years is for planting time access corporate groups to do the equivalent of what Bruce was talking about, getting quite a reasonable number of people for a relatively short period. And so we put a lot of effort into we pre-prepare the holes, have them all pre-watered, and on the day we place the plants out, and the planting team just comes along and pops them in the ground. And so it allows us to, in a morning planting, we typically do about 1,000 plants that way. So in 3 or 4 major plantings, we get most of our planting done. But the team works through the year, seed collecting, doing all of the things that, and we do an awful lot of weeding, both hand weeding ourselves and using contractors for herbicide application, particularly in pre-planting weed control.
Fantastic. That's a really good strategy to take on. Does anyone have any questions for Mike at all?
We had one here, Casey, from Eddie in the chat. Eddie asked, how long in advance of planting do you water and fertilise? Is that for Mike, or was that for Bruce?
I think it was for Bruce, but Mike, do you want to have a start at that one?
Sorry, I missed the first part of the question.
So I think it's from Eddie Wajong. Sorry if I'm saying that wrong, Eddie. How long in advance of planting do you water and fertilise?
Okay. We try and do it as close to planting as we can, because the longer you leave between planting and watering and planting, the longer there is for evaporative loss of the water. So we typically try and do it within 4 or 5 days of planting, but sometimes, just from convenience point of view, it spins out to a week or more. And also it depends how much rain you get in the intervening period. So once you've got the holes in place, it's actually very helpful in focusing the water that falls down flowing down the non-wetting sides of the hole to the bottom.
I don't know if you saw that, Mike. Eddie has added to that question. Do you mean 5 minutes before planting?
No, not 5 minutes. 4 or 5 days is often. I mean, it would be fine if it was the day before, but it's often hard to organise that. So typically, it would be in the week prior to planting. So, for instance, we've got a planting on the 21st of May coming up, and we've got the hole digging happening on the 16th. So that was the sort of time difference that we would normally leave.
That's great. Thanks for clearing that up. James has just dropped something into the chat. Hydrophobic soil question mark.
How does the...
Yeah, do you have a problem with hydrophobic soil? And why do you not put the water in after you've planted? The soil is highly non-wetting, and so part of the main reason that we originally did the holes was to allow us to be able to effectively water in summer. So you have that basin there that stays in place through to the summer, and that allows us to do
put a significant amount of water on each time we water during summer. So that would be typically a 5 litre application or something of that order. And the water then doesn't flow down the hill, as you know, and we can put it on at reasonably high volume. So that's the main rationale initially, but we found there are other benefits of having the holes as well, protection of the seedlings, and the reason we do so often when even after we've had 3 or 4 inches of rain in autumn, we drill our holes and find we've got dry sand at the bottom of our hole. And so that's why we water in advance. So the seedling settles into a wet soil, and the seedlings are watered before we plant them, so they're moist, and so they've got probably a fortnight before they need further water. And often, typically in winter, we would get a rain in that time. I mean, I'm not so comfortable about it at the moment, but that's typically our experience.
Have you used a wetting agent?
Sorry?
Have you used a wetting agent?
Yes, we use a wetting agent. We either tank mix it into the water tank that we water from, or if we sometimes we've got a dispenser that squirts out wetting agent in the right dose, if we have a non-tanker source.
Awesome information. Thank you, Mike. I might move on just because I don't want to run out of time to hear from the lovely ladies from Margaret River Coastal Residents Association. We've got Genevieve and Jenny joining us today, and they've done some amazing work over many years around the Capes region in terms of pigface translocation and brushing. So no presentation today, just a yarn from the lovely ladies. So if you want to unmute yourselves and let us know what you've been up to in your patch. I'll just get you to unmute. Thanks, Jenny. Or I can do it for you. There we go.
Yeah. Yeah, so sorry, we haven't got any lovely slides and things to show you, but that was just so impressive to see the presentations then from both Mike and Bruce, and congratulations to all the work that they've been doing. It's absolutely wonderful. How to begin? I suppose what's really becoming clear watching those is that coast revegetation work is very site specific. And where we've been working for well over 2 decades now, we haven't been able to use such resources as regular watering that the previous presentations have illustrated. So we've had to take a different approach, and possibly when the 2011 fire came through, it really tested our systems and the things that we do. Obviously, weeding is very important, and then, as you pointed out, we started to rely on using pigface or carpobrotus, and we would get cuttings from the local plants that were growing very close to the sites, and then plant those into the soil. And we still have to make sure that each one of those individual cuttings is deep sand planted to try and get it down into the moist soil. But because it's such a, what do you call it? Hydrophobic. Yeah, well, into any of the soils that we have to get it into deep. But because it's almost like a cactus in that it holds a bit of moisture in itself, you can actually leave the plant there being dormant until the rains come, and then it will take off from there. So it's a very good plant to use with children. And what direction we go to here in our discussion to talk about the recovery after the fire, it was a very depressing sight to see the first week after the fires went through, to see so many hectares of area coastal vegetation just wiped out, beyond wiped out, just absolutely razed to the ground. And it was the community response, the initial response was, we've got to get in there and plant, 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 plant. But we were very fortunate in that we had a learned gentleman in the community who had done a PhD on regenerating mineral sands mining sites. And he was able to inform us that you mustn't let people go into those bare areas and break the crust, because that crust, and it was quite crust, a hardened crust, was where a whole lot of microbacteria was staying dormant, and that the natural seeds that the bush still maintained in the soil needed that microbacteria to be able to successfully revegetate. So it was very difficult initially to ask the community to not go in there and plant, and not go in there and collect the bottles that have become obvious and the various rubbish that have become obvious, and just to hold back. And thankfully we had other agencies that were on board with us, such as the Shire and Nature Conservation and Southwest Development Commission.
Yes, and we had offers of help from all around. Even the Bunbury prisoners offered to bring teams down here, and they did lots of work. And initially it was simply fencing off the areas so that people couldn't walk from the road into the bush all the way around. And then and it happened in November, and by Christmas time we had actually big brochures made to give to every tourist who came to Margaret River. And when they went into their place of accommodation, or they went to the tourist bureau, they were given pamphlets to say, please keep off photograph, but stay on the roads and stay on footpaths. And we also had to have our accesses to the beach fenced, and they couldn't just go to the beach anywhere. And so that was done, and the prisoners did a lot of that fencing originally. And then we got lots of brushing, and we just brushed the edges so that it wasn't suitable for people to walk in. It was very discouraging for them to get out of their cars and walk through these barriers.
And how long after that time did you start to see regrowth?
Well, in about 2 weeks, some of the sedges were coming through. It was quite amazing. And then everybody wanted to donate plants. Everybody wanted to plant immediately, but of course you couldn't because it was summertime. But when the rain came, there were so many offers of help, and everybody wanted to plant. And Jenny and I would walk around trying to isolate places, and wherever we went, there were all these beautiful seedlings popping up. And it was really hard to actually direct all the people in to dig holes and plant plants, wasn't it?
Yes, it was, but you had to honour that community response. And with the Shire funding and other funding, a lot of plants were purchased, and we would nominate areas where we thought that it was less erosion would happen by letting the community come in, and we educated them into the deep sand planting technique, and everyone was on board, and it went really well. But unfortunately, because we didn't have the follow-up watering, we couldn't get the success rate that both Bruce and Mike are getting. But nevertheless, the community felt as if they participated, and the areas where they planted, the success rate didn't necessarily matter to a degree because the natural bush came back. And it's been... I
love that story. We've been talking about intervening and, you know, changing the course of everything that we do to try and get the science right and get the biggest rates. But yet, if you let nature do its thing, you can have just as good of a success. So I love that. Does anyone have any questions for the ladies down in Margaret River? And I love the community in Margaret River too. I'm not at all surprised to hear that there was a huge amount of support around your work at that time. Ness, do you have anything to add to that?
Hi, ladies. Great work that you guys are doing down there. It's really awesome. So I'm up in Perth NRM, and I'm such an advocate for brushing. I think it's just really a great way of dune stabilization and getting plants in as well. I'm running quite a few projects up here that has seen great success with brushing. So if anyone wants to chat to either of us organisations that are doing brushing work, definitely come out and chat to us for sure.
Yes, brushing is absolutely magic. It's the magic of our regeneration area. It just does so many different things in that point. It encourages people to go where you don't want them to go. It provides protection for little seedlings and for seed, and it also captures the sand that's been otherwise blown away. So we find that brushing is our biggest asset, that and weeding.
We've heard a lot from the southwest and the Perth region. I can see, Kat, you're joining us from the Peel Harvey region. Do you have any input into the conversation? I probably just caught you off guard there. Hi, Kat.
Question. What plants regenerated the best themselves?
Everything. But if you watch any site of any bushfire, you'll always have your pioneer plants coming through. And now it's been, 13 years, I suppose. We're actually seeing that some of those initial pioneer plants are beginning to die out, and as other plants have come up behind them. So I suppose initially we had the Mullumbakia and the Scabola and the rushes, as you said.
All the rushes came back very quickly.
And of course, the other species like your Melaleucas, and they were a lot slower to come back, and they need the protection of those pioneer plants before they can actually get themselves up through. So in some ways, in a perverse way, it's been an absolute, not a pleasure per se, but it's been just so intriguing to see that process in action.
Thank you. Does anyone have any extra questions or comments? Hi, Jane.
Thanks. Love your work. In addition to brushing, have you found that weedy grasses like oats and all those ones that get to about 3/4 of a metre tall and then die off and go brown, have you found that they protected your seedlings at all, or did they not happen because of your brushing?
They happened a little bit on some of the access ways.
Yes, away from the frontal dunes, the wild oats and things were terrible. They were about 2 metres tall, I think, the first year after the fire. But we pulled a lot of them out at that stage. And then we found that there were these little seedlings coming up, and the next year we didn't have that problem with the wild oats at all. And the seed favour.
So it was just the initial year that they came through. But one thing that did frighten us a little bit, and in hindsight we might have got onto a bit earlier, was the pipgrass. That we had some pipgrass coming up, and that alarmed us because we knew that further north it could become a monoculture. But fortunately, the other species grew up around to a large enough volume that it never actually got itself in as a monoculture. So that was beneficial.
We did have a spraying program that went with the pipgrass, otherwise it probably would have. But we never regenerated the very initial part that was very badly infected with pipgrass. It was sprayed, and we've never planted, we've never seeded, and it's really come back very well after 10 years. So that was good.
Sorry, I'll just jump in. I can just see a couple of reps from Fitzgerald Biosphere Association in the Great Southern. Did you have any questions there, Linda?
Oh, no, it's actually Frenchman Bay Association.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Wrong acronym there.
That's okay. So we're at Good Beach, and we've been we've got a weeding group that's been going for about 6 years. Our most active people are in their 80s that get out there weeding every month and stuff. We've recently been given permission to go into the national park in Taunderup. DBCA did a burn off, a fuel reduction burn between the gap and the blowholes, and we noticed that even though there were sort of tiny little Albertine woolly bushes about this big that had been coming up, the burn off was done in spring last year. We had rose geranium that were this big. So it's interesting to hear what you were saying about the microbacteria, because we've just had several weeding bees that have been going in. We've been going through this very ashy area, just trying to remove the competition so that the new plants can get through. And we had no idea that we might be doing some harm as well. So we'll have to investigate that a bit more. But yes, the rose geranium is really, it is threatening to become that monoculture and stopping anything else from regenerating like it normally would.
Jenny, I might reach out to you to see if we can get some more information around that can be sent out to WALN members, because that kind of information seems like it would be very valuable to everybody. Dan, do you have any comments? No, you're just here to look pretty. Does anyone have any other questions or comments? I'd really like it for Alva, being the coastal rep for CMCN, to follow up with everybody. I think there's been some really great conversation and definitely some topics that need to be covered a little bit more. Just to let you know that we are looking at Mary, sorry, you've got your little hand up there.
My understanding about burning, prescribed burning, is, and I was taught this some time ago, that it should never be done in spring, because that's before things have set seed properly, and yeah, you just never burn in spring or early summer.
Thank you for that, Linda.
Thank you.
Someone can tell DBCA that then.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, with DBCA's burning, it's not like we can really influence much their program there around that. But I was curious, is DBCA going in, are they assisting in that control of the geranium at all? Or have they just set the fire, walked away, and not really participating in that weed control process?
No, they've just set the fire and walked away. Apparently, locally, they don't really have enough resources to be able to do anything about that. So, and when we noticed it, because we've been doing it locally within council land, and then we've now been allowed to go into the national park.
It would be interesting to collate our experiences or responses around that kind of management behavior, because if they're doing fuel reduction burn-offs and environmental work, but then leaving environmental threats to prevail, it'd just be important to capture those observations and maybe, I don't know.
Yes.
I'm not convinced
You're
about
right.
influence in that space, but yeah.
You're right. It doesn't seem to be in the charter, but it's something that we've just had to deal with.
Just seeing Sue with her hand up there, waiting patiently.
I was just going to say, I think it is good to report what you see, because you're more likely to be out there on ground more often than DBCA. So if the outcome is bad, it should be reported to DBCA what you're seeing. The other observation I am making is down at Parry's Beach at Nornala at Easter, when there's lots of dead things around, but whole swathes of dead pelargonium that have been just monocultures, and then they leave exposed or bare ground that has nothing that can take over. You know, we shouldn't be allowing these monocultures. I know we don't have enough resources, but you know, the damage from coastal erosion, because there's nothing keeping the sand together, because the rose pelargonium is not standing up to our hot, dry summers, and then we've got coastal erosion.
Alva, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think just broadly, we're really interested in understanding what the landscape, sorry, that is a bit of a pun there, of coastal and marine stewardship is around the state. And I asked a question there in the chat about volunteers, and I don't think we really have time to get into that now, but I'm really keen to follow up with you all about your, the lay of the land for you in terms of people coming on board to actually help with the work that you do. Whether you have new people signing up, what we could do to try and help and promote the efforts that you have, on a day-to-day, but also as a body, a community of practice. How can we get more people to want to come on board and help us collectively be good coastal and marine stewards around WA? So I'm really keen to have those conversations, and you guys are the best people to ask. So if you're amenable to a follow-up chat with me, I would love that. Possibly, Casey, you could provide some contact details if people were okay with the sharing.
Yeah, of course. What I'll do, I'll put Alva's contact details into the follow-up email. So the event today has been recorded. We'll upload that to our website in a few days, and I'll send out Mike and Bruce's presentations, as well as the recording and a short survey, which I would love for you to fill out, just to give some additional feedback and cover off on anything that we didn't get to today that you'd like to hear more about. I might wrap it up there just so we're keeping to time. I really appreciate seeing lots of new faces today and also some new membership possibilities. So we would love you to join the collective voice for Landcare in WA if you're not already a member, whether you want to join as a member group or an associate. I will include some details in that in the next couple of days in the email, some links to the membership on the webpage. The next Landcare Checks In is being held on Tuesday, the 11th of June, and we're going to be unpacking the Future Drought Fund and looking at some WALN member projects as case studies. So please head over to our Humanitics page and check out our socials for registration details on that. Thank you for joining us live today. I really enjoyed seeing everybody, as I do each month, and I look forward to seeing you and your wonderful work as coastal champions across the state coming in. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Casey. That was really great. Thank you.
Thanks, Alva. Do you want to just stay on for a bit, Alva, if you've got time?
Sure, no problem.
And Ness, if you've got 5 minutes.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Good on you, Mike. Thanks. Thanks, Jenny
Yeah.
and Genevieve. I really appreciate you joining today.
Cheers. Bye now.
Great story. Thank you. I'll just stop.